Welcome to today's Explainer. All right, we are going to unpack a wild mathematical mystery buried super deep in ancient history. We're talking scribal puzzles, massive ancient calendars, and a chronological glitch so huge that it literally forced early scholars to choose between preserving a flawed truth or engineering a perfect timeline. We call it the Methuselah Paradox. Let's jump right in.
To really get this paradox, we've got to start with a number you might actually know, 969. According to the biblical record, Methuselah lived to be 969 years old. That famously makes him the absolute longest living human in the text.
But here's the thing. That massive lifespan creates a seriously incredible problem when we look at the oldest existing manuscripts. It brings up a highly provocative question. Did Methuselah survive the Great Flood? I mean, according to the math in the oldest Greek manuscript traditions, Methuselah actually outlived the flood by exactly 14 years. And no, he wasn't a passenger on Noah's Ark.
All right, Section 1. A man outlives the flood.
So what exactly are we dealing with here? Well, the Methuselah Paradox is a mathematical glitch found in the earliest Greek manuscript tradition of the Septuagint. Specifically, it's preserved in a book known as Codex Vaticanus. Now, it's totally crucial to understand we're looking at a textual anomaly here. This is a scribal reality, not some hidden mystical theological statement. The original Greek translators just made a simple calculation error, and later copyists faithfully, almost blindly, preserved it.
And this perfectly illustrates the exact math behind that glitch. Let's just walk through it step by step together. So in this specific manuscript, Methuselah is 167 years old when he begets his son Lamech. Lamech is then 188 years old when he begets Noah. And from there, 600 years passed from Noah's birth right up until the Great Flood hits. So add those up. 167 plus 188 plus 600, that equals exactly 955 years from Methuselah's birth to the flood. But, like we just said, Methuselah's total lifespan is 969 years. 969 minus 955 leaves 14 years completely unaccounted for. Mathematically speaking, Methuselah is literally treading water for a decade and a half.
Moving on to Section 2, the Ancient World Clock. Now you might be wondering, why on earth were ancient scholars tracking these numbers so closely in the first place? Well, they were actually trying to construct something called the Anno Mundi, which is Latin for in the year of the world. This wasn't just casual reading for them. This was high-stakes chronographic research. They were actively building a master mathematical timeline to prove the antiquity of their faith to the surrounding pagan cultures. Their specific target? They wanted to prove that exactly 5,500 years had passed from the creation of Adam to the birth of Jesus. You see, they viewed history as this grand world week of 7,000 years, and they absolutely needed the math to hit that 5,500-year mark perfectly so it would align with their prophecies.
So the crucial takeaway here is that early scholars had to add up every single lifespan to build this bridge of time. Take an early scholar named Hippolytus of Rome, for example. He used the Greek Septuagint's genealogical arithmetic and calculated exactly 2,242 years from Adam to the flood. He did this to stay perfectly on track to hit that 5,500-year target by the time of the Nativity. For them, this math was literally the foundation of their entire worldview.
All right, Section 3, the Methuselah Paradox explained.
But what actually happens when that grand, perfectly mathematical timeline slams headfirst into our 14-year Methuselah glitch? Well, it builds into a massive scholarly crisis. The manuscript data was just completely chaotic. Even the great theologian Augustine of Hippo grappled with this paradox. In his famous work City of God, Augustine cites that from Adam to the deluge there were 2,262 years. But wait, notice that this is 20 years more than Hippolytus' 2,242. Augustine was basically reading from a mix of Latin manuscript that essentially preserved parts of the glitch. He recognized this profound discrepancy between his Greek-based copies and the Hebrew texts, which, by the way, calculated a much shorter 1,656 years. He was staring right at the paradox, trying to make sense of it.
And the physical evidence of this chaos? It's scattered all over ancient documents. Just look at these varying flood totals. Because of the Methuselah Paradox, copyists started trying to fix the problem themselves. Think about it. If a scribe left Methuselah at 167, you get that awkward 14-year overlap. But if a scribe went in and corrected Methuselah's begetting age to 187, matching the Hebrew text, well, the math is suddenly fixed. He dies 6 years before the flood. Problem solved, right? Actually, scratch that. Fixing Methuselah caused a massive chain reaction, which ended up forcing other scribes to tweak Lamech's age from 188 down to 182 just to keep the grand total somewhat stable. This frantic scribal patching process is exactly why we see ancient historians constantly arguing over flood dates of 2242, 2248, 2256, and 2262.
Which brings us to Section 4.
Playing biblical Sudoku.
Because, as you can probably guess, once you change one single number in a highly interconnected timeline, everything else breaks. It's really helpful to think of these Septuagint manuscripts like a giant spreadsheet where every single cell is linked by a formula. Step 1. A scribe fixes Methuselah's age to 187 so the poor guy doesn't have to swim through the flood. Sounds good, but wait. Step 2. They realize this 20-year shift just completely broke their perfectly crafted 5,500-year countdown to the birth of Christ. So, on to Step 3, they have to selectively adjust Lamech's age, dropping it from 188 down to 182, just to compensate and basically rebalance the books. It was literally a high-stakes puzzle of theological geometry.
Let's look at Section 5, Custodians versus Engineers.
The intense pressure of playing this numbers game eventually split the ancient scholarly world right down the middle into two rival factions. On one side, you have the custodians. Their whole philosophy was simple: copy what is written, even if the math completely fails. They prioritize strict textual fidelity over mathematical perfection. But on the other side, you have the engineers. Their philosophy was the complete opposite: correct the math so the prophetic timeline functions. They fully believed in a grand, eschatological narrative, and they prioritized symbolic symmetry over a raw, messy text.
The custodians, like the great historian Eusebius and the later archivist George Cincelus, they were fundamentally honest about these discrepancies. Eusebius looked at the raw 1670-year data, saw the crazy Methuselah Paradox, and essentially said, "Look, here is the data, it is inconsistent. I will report it exactly as such." They acted as true preservers of the earliest textual tradition. They preserved the flawed original of Codex Vaticanus without ever tampering with it.
But the engineers, guys like the Alexandrian monks Penodorus and Ennianus, they simply couldn't accept a broken timeline. To them, if the math didn't work, well, the manuscript had to be corrupted. Ennianus went to incredible lengths, actively engineering and patching the numbers in the Alexandrinus tradition just to force the timeline to hit a mathematically perfect target date for creation. He did this to ensure it synced flawlessly with their Easter liturgical cycles. They weren't just scribes, they were the architects of the calendar.
Finally, Section 6, the legacy of the fork.
So, what is the lasting impact of this great manuscript fork? I mean, why does a millennia-old math problem actually matter to our understanding of history today? Well, the legacy is beautifully summarized right here. The varying totals to the flood are not proof of random corruption, but proof of intentional engineering. When we look at those different numbers, the 2242, 2262, 2256, we aren't just looking at ancient scribal typos. No, we are looking at a permanent historical record of human beings actively negotiating the boundary between raw, unedited data and the deep, deep human desire for theological perfection and order.
It really makes you think about how we handle information today, doesn't it? So I'll leave you with this provocative question to ponder. If you were the one holding that ancient pen, which side would you choose? Are you a custodian at heart, dedicated to preserving a raw, flawed truth? Or are you an engineer, entirely willing to adjust the data to build a perfect narrative? Thank you so much for joining me for today's explainer. Keep questioning the numbers, and I'll catch you next time.